Translation: the demigods, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you, and thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. Purport: the demigods are empowered administrators of material affairs. The supply of air, light, water, and all other benedictions for maintaining the body and soul of every living entity is entrusted to the demigods, who are innumerable assistants in different parts of the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Their pleasures and displeasures are dependent on the performance of yajnas by human being. Some of the yajnas are meant to satisfy particular demigods, and even in doing so, Lord Vishnu is worshipped in all yajnas as the chief beneficiary. It is stated also in Bhagavad Gita that Krishna himself is a beneficiary of all kinds of yajnas. Bhoktaram yajna tapasam. Therefore, ultimate satisfaction of the yajnapati is the chief purpose of all yajnas. When these yajnas are perfectly performed, naturally the demigods in charge of the different departments of supply are pleased, and there is no scarcity in the supply of natural products. Performance of yajnas has many side benefits, ultimately leading to liberation from material bondage. By performance of yajnas, all activities are purified, as is stated in the Vedas. Ahara sudhav satvasudihi satvasudhav dhruva smritihi smriti lambe sarva grantina vipramokshaha. By performance of yajna, one's edibles become sanctified. By eating sanctified foodstuff, one's very existence becomes purified. By purification of existence, finer tissues in the memory become sanctified. When memory is sanctified, one can think of the path of liberation. And all of these combined together lead to Krishna consciousness, the great necessity of present-day society. This verse from chapter 3 speaks about first about doing your duty, and then doing sacrifice, and then doing sacrifice for devas. And Krishna explains that from the beginning of creation, I've created these devas, they're being in existence, and they're there to assist the Supreme Lord for giving things to the living entities within the material world. Also, we'll see, if we examine the creation, how creation takes place with Pradhan, and then Mahavishnu collapsing over the energy, and then it turns into Mahatattva, and then Mahatattva gradually separates into gunas, and then the gunas begin to separate into different things, different elements. So Tamagun gives rise to sense objects and gross material objects. That is the ether, sound, ether, touch, air, etc., down to earth, smell on earth. These things come out. And in the mode of passion, we get the senses coming out, the ear, nose, eye, touch, etc. And the action senses also, the hands and the feet, etc. And in the mode of goodness, we get the mind coming out. But apart from the mind, we also get the devatas of the 10 senses. That is sun god for the eye, Agni for the voice, etc. Vishnu for the feet, Indra for the hands. Okay? Now the devatas for the different senses coming out also. And this is considered part of the elements of creation. So the devatas in charge of your senses, of your body, are also inherent in the creation of the material world. So in other words, we have, as well as your senses, which are the subtle senses, and your gross body with their senses, and your mind, and your intelligence, and your ego, you also have the devatas there, controlling those senses and helping you, perceive and get enjoyment through your senses. In other words, the whole material world, the creation, is there for the pleasure of the jiva in one sense. So the jiva can use his senses to get pleasure. The devas are also there as intermediaries to help you enjoy. So this is inherent in creation itself. And when the jivas get their bodies and their place in these different areas of the material world, then particularly an Earth planet, we have the control of everything by these higher living entities, the devas. So the rain and the food and the sunlight and everything is under the control of devatas. Or personalities, persons, who are ultimately under the Supreme Lord. This, of course, is a little bit difficult for many people to accept, nowadays at least. But we see it as was very common belief in ancient times, not only in India, but in all civilizations of the world. You'll find primitive societies. They believe in spirits of some sort controlling different things. They'll worship the sun as an entity, as a deity, or they'll worship the rain cloud or whatever, or the trees, or whatever. I think in New Guinea, Indonesia, that's one of the religions, animism. Animism refers to the primitive religions. You have to list your religion as, it's Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, or animism. You got a choice. So they still have people believing in those things. So, spirits. Now, from of course, the Christian point of view, this is all pagan. This is all nonsense. There's only one God. We don't have all these spirits around at all. They don't exist. We shouldn't worship them. And of course, we shouldn't worship them. It means that they don't exist. That's what it means in Christianity. Though that's not a logical conclusion. Don't worship doesn't mean they don't exist. Because we also say don't worship them, but we don't say they don't exist. We say they do exist. But nevertheless, in the Christian world, they say no, nothing exists. Only God exists, and there's no other controllers in the world, etc. Therefore, the Christians believe that. Then when we get modern science again, they say, no, nothing. God doesn't exist, nor do devas exist. They go one step further from religion. Christianity says no devas, only God. And science says no God nor devas. Nobody controlling. There is no controller. It's all accidental. The only controllers are the laws of material nature, which are there by themselves. That's all. And that's it. Laws of physical nature, which are just there, period. So that is how modern science has arisen, explaining things in terms of these gross physical laws. And it works to some extent. To some extent it works. However, as we've discussed, there's also this other law at work. That's the higher laws, which involve values and ethics, things like that. Law of karma is there. So that's not taken into account by science at all. But for a human being, it's very significant because it determines your next body. But we don't take it into account in science. We're only concerned about the atoms and the molecules and objects floating through space and things like this, which is kind of useless in one sense because it's not even about the human being and where he's going. It's something about where objects in space are going. So yes, it's a good science for inert matter, perhaps, but for the human being, it's not so relevant. More relevant than that is, where's the human being going? However, of course, science has an explanation of that. They'll go backwards and they'll say from analysis of physical laws, we can predict molecular movements and then movements of objects, etc. And we can predict what's going to happen in your body, which is medical science. But then that breaks down into molecules also, and things like that. So therefore, that's all predictable. And we can also break your brain down into particles also, neurons made up of plus and minus charges. And therefore, even your thought patterns can be analyzed in terms of physics. And your emotions and everything can be broken down. And that means your behavior, your emotions, your thoughts, in this world, everything can be ultimately analyzed into chemical reactions or physical laws. And therefore your whole life, in other words, could be predictable in terms of material laws. That's of course the ambition of some scientists to do that, though they've never succeeded. So that's their idea of some scientists. They're the real materialists. They think that we can actually predict and ultimately mold human life if we know the physical laws involved. Of course, in genetics we get that coming out in a very gross way, by manipulating the genes, then we can create the human being we want. So in this way we got the very gross aspect of science trying to control the human being through physical law. But we know also that there is this other law there which we cannot, which is a higher law actually. And that is the laws of karma, etc. These higher laws put into operation by the Supreme Lord, by which your the quality of your actions determines the result, not simply physical relationships of objects, but the intention behind your act. This helps to determine your future. Whether it's pop or punya or whatever, all these type of things will determine your future. So in other words, it's the value of the act, not so much the force of the act, which determines your future in terms of next body. So that's very difficult for a scientist to grasp because it doesn't accept anything except the physical laws. So to have these higher laws there, we definitely need another type of some sort of authority there. How do these laws operate? How do they get fulfilled? There's got to be some intelligence there to judge the quality of your acts. And it says it can't just be physical laws anymore, because we know that values are very subjective, and you come to a correct judgment whether this is good or bad, and what type of karma you should get. It requires a lot of thought, and a lot of judgment by somebody. It's not just a gross physical law like anything else. So it's much more complex. Yet we know the law of karma is inevitable and it is completely just. So there are personalities of superior intelligence obviously working in this material world if the law of karma is so just. Ultimately we have the Supreme Lord. But of course we know the Supreme Lord doesn't have to entangle himself in this material world. As far as he goes, he's the witness as Paramatma. And he's Sama, and he sees that everything is carried out. But he has his workers doing the job for him. So that's where the Devatas come in. They're the ones that have to directly involve themselves in the material world. Lord Brahma and all the different Devatas of the material world, the sense Devatas, helping you with your senses and getting things fulfilled this way. So therefore, as well as the physical universe, we've got a universe of beings who are also doing things to help us fulfill our desires and also to give us the results of our karma. That's the Devatas. So it's not just human beings in the material world. There's so many other living entities we don't see who are doing things and much more complicated things with all the human beings. So therefore we have another idea of the material world when we think of this. We have our level of existence, but we have many, many higher levels of beings also. And they're not completely separate from us. They're interacting with us also and giving us results. Therefore we cannot predict the physical world just based on physical principles, because there's higher intelligences doing things with their own laws. So here Krishna says that if you want to live happily on earth, you have to do it by acknowledging the higher authorities and following those laws. If you don't follow those laws, then you can never be happy. So therefore, if in modern life, theoretically, we can adjust everything to get enough food for everybody, etc., by physical manipulation, but that does not guarantee it still. Because you're not involving these personalities here who are distributing according to your karmas, etc. We're not involving this at all. when we're not acting with these laws. Therefore, no matter how much we try to predict something according to physical laws for the human being, it's not going to work out. So for the human being, physical laws are less important, and more important are the, we can say, the ethical laws. These are more important for the happiness of the human being, and that's completely neglected by science. Completely. So that is a big weakness, we can say. Scientific attempts to make us happy and give us a ideal world here where nobody has to suffer. It won't work unless you have the moral principles of karma behind it. You cannot do it. So we have these. Therefore, we have these beings, all these different beings above us, working also, and they control the senses, etc. And another way of looking at it, we can say devatas are senses, and if your senses aren't working properly, it means something is wrong with that devata. Devata is not happy. Some problem or offense against that particular devata for some reason. Some act has been committed against the I or the I devata, therefore your I cannot function properly. Or similarly for anything, you cannot enjoy properly with one of your senses because of some offense. Directly or indirectly against the devata, or against if you afflict another human being's eye, that's an offense against the devata, because you're interfering with his job of supplying that person's eye with his proper vision. So therefore you get some problem in your eye. And therefore we have the devatas there to help us give enjoyment, and if the devatas don't cooperate, you can't get the enjoyment. Another way of looking at it is through looking at karma and, of course, our enjoyment in the material world. That's through astrology. So astrology deals with planets, and planets are simply representations of devatas also. Ultimately, when we talk about planets, we're not concerned about the rocks up there, the different bodies of rocks that are floating around and the thing. They're there, of course, and they determine, those visible things determine the where the planets are, but more important than the planet is the personality behind the planet. And those personalities, they are in charge of certain aspects of your life. In other words, as devatas again, this is another way of looking at the devatas in terms of your life. And they're also connected with different senses again. So the sun is connected with the eye, and the moon is connected with the mind, and the Mercury is connected with the intellect, like this, and the nervous system. Jupiter is connected with your liver, like that. Money, children, like that. So each planet is connected with different organs of the body and different tissues of the body, like fat, muscle, bone, etc. And with different aspects of your life, like education, money, longevity, sickness, marriage, progeny, travel, losses, karma, profession, body. All these things are divided into 12 categories, and they're allotted to the different zodiac signs and the different planets. So therefore, and when a planet is weak, or a planet's in the wrong place, or the wrong planet's doing the wrong thing, then we get problem, karma. We get suffering. One problem is giving one planet, we say, is giving a problem. So I mean, that devata is again giving problem because of some, we could say, some karma is there in terms of offense, and therefore the planet is not acting properly, and therefore we get some problem in that part of the body. So again, we see that there are some personalities involved there who are intelligently judging our activities, and based on that, giving us some response to that. If we're not responsible for our activities, then we get some suffering. And that can be predicted in terms of what the planets are doing in the chart. So therefore, astrology, we can say, is just another way of looking at karma as implemented by different devatas in charge of different areas of our life and different senses of our body. That's all. And for some mysterious reason, they operate through their movements in the sky. It's with the gross planets. That is the Venus, Mars, etc., and the way they are related to the Earth and how they're related to each other in the sky at any particular time. And with that we interpret what effect it has on your body. So that is another aspect of seeing devatas again. So the idea here is that matter is not just matter that's operating here. It's matter in relation to jiva, and then the jiva has responsibility in the material world, and therefore there's laws that the jiva has to follow. And these laws are implemented by the higher powers, as the devatas. And they put us into certain positions. In that sense, in chapter 3 also, Krishna says, everything is done by Prakriti. And if you think you're the doer, you're not the doer. Prakriti is pushing everything. So that means, of course, not that we have no free will, but rather that certain aspects are out of our control. That is, the karma must come. Those laws are there, and the devatas make sure the laws operate, and therefore we're put into certain situations like that. So we have no control over that. In that sense, Prakriti is doing everything, and we're not doing it. So in this way we're going about in the material world, not alone, but with all these other personalities also involved in our life, some way or other, influencing us and giving us results in this way. However, though we have a whole flock of devatas trailing us around everywhere, giving us results for our activities and giving us karmas, etc., they also are respectful in the sense that they are not trying to influence us. They're leaving our free will alone. They must implement the law of karma and give us the results of our activities. But they do not interfere with our choices in life, our mind, in other words. They don't influence. They're neutral. They're not saying, now do this or not do this, do this, do this, you got to do this. And they're not involved in that. So they just leave you some choice, do this or do that. And that's up to us. So now in the though for the last so many centuries the whole idea of other beings other than God in the Christian world have been discarded as being either superstitious or paganism, one or the other. Surprising that in the modern world again, this has all come up again. Many people do believe in devatas, maybe at the expense of the Supreme Lord, which is not so good because we say, we should never equate the devatas with Krishna and like that, not give them separate worship. But we see, but there is some sort of, among some people, there is an appreciation of, subtle personalities also work in this material world, particularly in the New Age type of philosophy. They understand devatas for trees, devatas for the rivers, devatas for the mountains, devatas for the volcano, devatas, in charge of the different species of animals, etc., and for the planets, etc. There's some appreciation, probably because they're getting into more primitive religions and stuff that also believe in this. But even other people, not New Age, but even scientists to some degree, get a little bit of this perception and that there must be some other forces at work governing matter also in relation to the human being. Otherwise, how can it act like it acts? Unless there's some personalities involved also with everything. I mentioned about that psychiatrist in Russia, the lady psychiatrist met the shaman lady. She met this shaman lady and she got all this information. She learned about the soul and everything from her. And then one other thing that she said she learned was that the shaman lady told her that, you see, every object has a spirit with it. Whatever it is, whether it's the cup or the kartal or the table, there's something associated, there's some living entity associated with everything. Doesn't mean, of course, that this is alive in the sense it's a body for a jiva, but there's always some spirit with every object for the protection of that object in the material world. So therefore the shamans, they give great respect to objects and they treat them almost like living beings because there's a living being with it anyway, even if it is an inanimate object. So they give respect to all objects for that reason, because there's a spirit with it. And of course certain objects get great powers. Even though they're inanimate objects, they get great powers because of the spirit with it. So for instance, the shamans, they have a great reverence for their drums. They bang on their drums, and they treat it like a living being, because there's also a being with it, and through that being they're able to get into different levels of consciousness, etc. So then from that she appreciated that the world is not so simple as we think it is, and there's living entities everywhere, and they're helping out with the material world and with the material objects, etc. With all the different forms in the material world, and they're protecting, etc. Other people, of course, have some strange experiences also like this. There was one, I think a husband and wife. They were up in Scotland. Scotland's not a very friendly country in terms of the weather, I think. Kind of bleak up there. But they decided they'd have a garden, let's grow some nice flowers and vegetables up there. I think it's called Findhorn. So they started out very humbly trying to do something. They're kind of New Age people, I think. So they started digging up the garden and doing something like that. Then they started hearing these little voices saying, "You don't do that. You got to do it like this. Plant it like this. We don't like this. You can't do this. You got to do it this way." And then they followed the instructions. And, okay, well, let's follow the instructions. Nothing to lose. And they found out that their crops would grow much better. The flowers would bloom in the middle of winter, and they would get cabbages this big, and all sorts of strange things began to happen. With some very absurd instructions also that didn't make any sense from our logical point of view. They didn't say you pour in this fertilizer or that. They just you do some rather esoteric things with each plant, and somehow it begins to grow much better than any other plants. So they were got some great fame because they were growing all these fantastic flowers and fruits and vegetables, and they're coming out in enormous sizes in the wrong season. And they're simply following the instructions given to them by someone or other, So their realization that each plant actually has a devata behind it. Some spirit is there, and a spirit for the cabbage, a spirit for the cauliflowers, and a spirit for the beans, and a spirit for the carrots, and the spirits for the roses, and they were giving instructions, and you got to do it this way, don't do it that way. This is what we like. And that way they followed the instructions, and then they began to grow all these fantastic crops. So their realization is that, even in gardening, something is like that all the plants involved, their personalities, and they have likes and dislikes, etc. So they're not so dumb as we think they are, and there's spirits behind them. So many spirits like that, we see that that's taking place. In another area, one healer, she was doing healing work, hands-on healing with her hands, like Reiki, like that. It wasn't Reiki, but like that. So she did a lot of work, massage therapy and things like this. And then she began to get this like clairvoyant vision, where she could see the subtle bodies of people and the auras, and she began to see the chakras and the different layers of the body and everything like that. And then she would do her healing work, and then she could, diagnose properly by having this vision. And she can feel it with her hands also. And of course what happens is she would use her hands, and through her hands she would put energy into the subtle body of the person, and this would help them, or into their chakras, etc. But then if she began to do this, and she put her hands on like that, then she noticed that because she had this vision, of the auras and everything. She noticed that other personalities were also there, doing the healing work. And that all these ethereal beings would be there, and they would be helping with the healing work also. And she could observe that actually they were working through her. Actually, they would kind of slip into her body, and then they would start doing the work through her body. She would just kind of stand there, and all these entities would do all this work, and she's just kind of standing there like that, doing nothing. And this, of course, was kind of sort of an extraordinary vision. She could see this, and then she was wondering, I wonder if this is real or not, because maybe I'm just imagining all this. But then she called some other people who would observe, who also had similar vision, and then she would let them observe, and then afterwards she would ask them, okay, what did you see? And then by confirming what they saw and what she was seeing, then they could see that they were having the same, seeing the same thing. In other words, on the subtle level, that there are other beings involved, assisting. And when she would cure people, then these beings would also come, and they would also help with the cure. In fact, they would do most of the cure after a while. She wouldn't do anything. She would just act as a medium for them to come. And what was curious was that they would do operations, of course on a subtle level, but their operations were just like we do on the gross level. They have the little scissors there, little tubes going in there, stitches, and stitching up your body, your subtle body that is, and cutting it open in this place and that place, and putting a new thing in here, and pulling out a chakra, putting a new one in, and doing all these little, things, operations, just like we do on the gross level. It was all in a very subtle way. They were doing all this, subtle energy, and she could see all this taking place. So, and then she realized that, that not only for this, but probably for all other activities we do, generally, there could be other beings involved in them. So now we're not the only doer here. There's also other beings that could also help in the acts of what we're doing for her healing work. They were definitely involved, and they were helping out and doing so many things. And that again shows that other jivas are there with different types of bodies who are helping in these different situations. As a more dramatic case, of course, there's one healer in Brazil, quite a famous healer. He has his own clinic down there on the outside of Brasilia, about 2 hours away from Brasilia, capital of Brazil. He was an illiterate person, just brought up as a poor family, illiterate. Then at a certain time, he had this vision in which one Catholic saint came before him and began speaking to him. And I think at that time she instructed him, you have to heal people. And so he didn't know what that meant, because he didn't know anything about healing. He wasn't interested at all. Just a little boy, actually, maybe a teenager or something. I think he was a cobbler, fixing shoes or something like that. And he got this vision, So he didn't know what to do. But then he discovered that actually he could cure people. And miraculously, he could cure people, and go out and cure people. And he got this reputation. People would start following him around trying to get cured, And then people got envious. Doctors would get envious, because he was, what is this guy doing, trying to cure people, and he's got a license or anything like that. And the church also got wind of it, he's acting like he's Christ or something, curing people. So the church didn't like him, and the doctors didn't like him, and the government didn't like him. So he'd get harassed wherever he went. He didn't really want to do this, but, it worked, and the people were running after him, trying to get cured like this. They had a big problem with the government for a long time, like this, and with the church and with the police and everything. They would harass him like anything, And he was poor, he didn't have any money at all, and he couldn't take money for this either. It was forbidden. They said, you cannot take money for this. You just simply have to cure people, that's all. That's all you do. And he just used his hands, and he would cure. Anyway, he got such a big reputation that he even got a clinic later on, and then later the government didn't harass him much anymore. And he's still there, and he does this thing. And people claim that, they get cured of blindness, they get cured of cancer, they get cured of AIDS, they get cured of rheumatism, they get cured of, any complaint you have. He cures them. And he does operations on people with his fingers. And he just does something. He pulls their body apart like that, pulls some stuff out and puts it back together again, like that. Well, he even has videos of it, and where he does operations in public. The famous operation, he did it on himself. He got like a heart attack or something one time. He was in the hospital at the time. Then he didn't want to be in the hospital, so he left. And then in public, he did an operation on himself. And it was televised, apparently. And which, when he does this, he goes into a trance state, like he doesn't feel anything. And then he doesn't even know what he's doing, actually. And he took his kitchen knife, and he cut himself open, did an operation, put himself back together again. That's just recorded on videos. That he does operations, he cuts people open, and you can see the blood coming out and everything. Then he somehow just heals up right there, and there's a little scar there. That's all. There's no blood anymore. So anyway, his explanation is that when he does this, he of course doesn't know what he's doing. He's just a medium, and different other entities, different religious persons, like the one thing is Loyola, I think one of the Catholic saints, comes into him, and a few Catholic doctors and other people, 23 personalities come into his body at different times, and then they do the operations on a very subtle level. And this way they can do operations that we can't do. They can cut open the body and put it back together without having any, wound, whatever there afterwards. Anyway, he does these operations very quickly. I think he sees about 3,000 people a day. And he gives out prescriptions and everything like that. And he's still doing it, and people are still coming, etc. like that. So that's just an example that somehow these powers are there, and he says it's not him doing it at all. It's these other beings, higher beings, are doing all this. And they're just using his body as a medium. He says, I don't know why they chose me, and him in particular, but somehow he's got that power. He's not the only one. In Brazil, there's others also have the same similar types of powers, cure people also. But anyway, that shows that it cannot be explained in terms of just matter. Like the regular doctors in the material world, it's only matter. We have a knife and we cut open a person, and then we cut something out and we put some anesthesia there so you don't feel it, and then we stitch it back together again and let it heal. Like that, that's the normal process. But in these operations, etc., they do a similar type of thing, but it doesn't follow the same procedure because there's no wound there, and it's immediately healed, and we don't see anything. We don't see, anybody visibly doing anything except him with his fingers maybe doing something, but we don't see anesthesia going in. We don't see disinfectant going in. But nevertheless, nobody feels anything. They don't feel pain, nor do they have any infections afterwards. So it doesn't follow the normal procedure of this material world. Yeah, the effects are there, and the people get cured. On the physical level, it's not this subtle. On the physical level, they get cured of so many diseases. So this, in other words, is beyond the normal laws of matter and laws of science and laws of surgery and medicine that we know. So how's it taking place? Because there's a subtle body, there's subtle living entities, and they're interacting on the subtle level and on the gross level also. They can do many things. So, in other words, we're not the only ones around here. There's personalities above us. However, as we know from as Vaishnavas, we should differentiate between these beings and God. Now that's where probably people have a lot of problems, especially if something miraculous happens. Oh, God did it. Okay? So some people worship that man as God because he's curing people, so maybe he's God. Or maybe he's the incarnation of Christ or something like that. So he of course denies it. He says, I'm not. So then people can't make that assumption. But of course, if he was duplicitous, he could do that and say, I'm God, and people would worship him because he cures people in a miraculous way. And of course, it was in India, definitely he would get worshipped as God. As we see, many people when they do get worshipped as God, they do some miraculous thing and they get worshipped. And they don't deny it. That's the thing. He denies it. No, I'm not God. I'm just a servant of God. That's what he says. But in India, they say, yeah, I am God. And then everybody worships him like this. So we have to be wary that this is not actually, that person not God, and even if someone is acting through him, is not necessarily God, but it's rather some higher beings acting through them. In other words, David does have higher powers than we have. They can do many things we cannot do. So what looks like a miracle or whatever can be done by them, not necessarily God. God can also do this, of course, but not necessarily he involves at all because he's a much higher level. So usually it is through higher beings of some sort that all these so-called miracles take place, not through God directly. So therefore we have to distinguish that when extraordinary things happen, we can not always say it's God. It could be the intervention of David, by the will of God, of course. But therefore we should not worship the Devatas also as God. And then there's another problem in India, that therefore I worship this Devata gives me this result, therefore he is God. They definitely have more power. But we cannot say simply because a person has more power than me, therefore he's God. We have to distinguish who's got the most power. So therefore, though these beings are powerful and we give them respect, we also have to differentiate the supreme person also and give him special respect and special regard. So that person who is above everyone, that person we call God, and we don't confuse that with all the other personalities who may have powers of some sort. So this is a common confusion that people have. In India especially, this confusion is there. Therefore we have this offense to confuse God with the Devatas and mix them up. Either put God down on the level of Devatas or put all the Devatas up on the level of God and say they're all equal. So the Devatas, why we don't consider them equal is because they are by nature different from God. That is, they are Jiva also. They have special powers more than us, and therefore we can give them more respect. They are delegated by the Supreme Lord, and therefore they got powers also from Him, and we have to give respect for that reason. But they don't act independently. They are Jiva, not God, and they don't have complete independence to do as they want. And they are under the Supreme Lord. And of course, they're also endowed with material bodies, like us. And though they're more subtle, they do have birth and death. And so their jivas encased in a material body. So that distinguishes them from God. We put God on a much higher level. So we have to distinguish between Devata and God. Nevertheless, we have to give the proper respect. So anyway, the Devatas are the agents of the Supreme Lord in the material world to help it operate on the moral level and to give you karmas and to give you results and help you do so many things in the material world there. And so we have the gross physical laws, which science studies, plus we have the higher physical laws of karma, etc. And then we have the Devatas there to implement those laws, the higher laws for us. And even, of course, the physical laws, they also have personalities behind them. Like I said, the objects have personalities behind them also, helping out with them. So even the gross physical objects do have personalities there, some spirits or whatever with the objects for their preservation or whatever. So therefore everything in the material world is more complex. It's attached, somehow related with life forms, somehow or other. Everything is. So this is a completely different vision from the vision of the scientists, where everything is just a bunch of unconscious atoms and things floating around in space. Not like that. It's full of life, actually. And ultimately, the Supreme Lord is there, governing everything. Okay. Good question.
That's the technologies that modern society is coming up with. What powers are kind of involved in creation?
Which technologies?
Like computers and televisions and all this.
Uh-huh. Well, that of course is gross material technology. But what it, on one level, what it's doing, of course, computers are what? Imitation of intelligence, basically. They can substitute your intelligence. And, of course, other things involve visuals, etc. They're playing also with your perceptions, senses, and also with the mind. So in other words, these technologies are, we can say, they're dangerous in one sense, because they can influence greatly these areas, the subtle body. In other words, we're talking about intelligence, mind, etc., and perceptions, the subtle senses and everything. So they can be dangerous. They can be beneficial, of course, in one sense. They can help us in some ways because we are imperfect, and they can speed processes up for us, like intellectual work. But they can also be very dangerous for us, because when we get into these areas, then there can be some influence back and forth. So therefore, people can use those instruments to influence us, influence our subtle bodies. So therefore, that's what we call, brainwashing or whatever. We can use technologies to influence the mind in certain ways, and that way interfere with our own subtle body and ultimately with our free will by influencing us in the wrong way. As I said, the Devatas don't interfere. Okay, they give you your karma, whatever, but they're not going to interfere with your choices. But then by distorting things in certain ways, in other words, putting you in some sort of illusion by distorting your emotional body or whatever, your perceptions, etc., then they can manipulate your choices. So that's very unhealthy. There is indications they do have things that can influence your mind and make you think specific things and get different emotions at a distance, and they can influence you, make you crazy if you want to, because at a distance is happening with some certain types of energy waves or whatever into your mind. And so some probably computers. I think they can analyze your brain waves, and each person's got a different type of brain wave like that. And then they can figure out your patterns, your thought patterns, and then they can echo them back into the computer, make it all, and then they can reproduce thoughts and then feed it back into your mind and give you different thoughts. They're pretty dangerous.
Still the effectual for someone a high level of sense control?
With sense control, a high level, less effective. But of course, generally, just like our body, even if you're a saint, somebody can go and kill you and shoot you, and you still get shot like that. So even with your subtle body, it's the same as material energy, and somehow the power of that, the manipulation of that thing could affect you also, but less likely, because the soul's involved there in a strong degree, so it can figure out where the illusion's taking place and, act against it somehow or other. But still, these machines are pretty powerful, could be very powerful. Yes.
This sort of brings up another point. Most people are influenced, for instance, by the multimedia. And at the same time, knowing very well that the media is capable of all sorts of visual and auditory tricks now, especially now everyone knows they can create movies with space machines that don't exist, etc., etc. Still, they'll see something on the TV and say, oh, this is factual, without checking much into it. And they seem highly influenced by this, I find already. I mean, we're not even talking subtle there. We're talking just they watch some program and they listen to facts.
Well, even the fact of, I think television is considered like a hot medium, and is very influential, more than the written medium, for instance, because it involves stimulation of your visuals more than printed media. So anything, and especially if it flashes, and it's got some bright color on it, and then immediately it catches your eye, and you're likely to believe it. Somehow the nature of that medium is that it's very urgent and it's very immediate, and you just kind of accept it. So they can say anything on television. Generally, you won't question it. Okay, they said the president did this today. He said this, he did this. You accept it like that, and they'll show something on that. This is what happened. This one shot that one. This guy's fault, and you'll accept it. You don't really question whether it's true or not. The event could have happened in the opposite, way, and it wasn't this guy's fault, it was this guy's fault. But they say that, and then you'll kind of believe it. This is the authority saying it, and you'll take the authority of the television screen and saying it's true. So you have to be very careful with that. So that's why news itself, if somebody's controlling the news, then your whole perception of reality could change. In other words, your country can report the war in one way, another country could report in a different way. And that country will have a whole conception different from what your country is viewing the war as, because of that. And you'll never know. But you'll believe it because it's so live and it's so, everything's active on the screen. And we saw it on television. It's like that. It happened like this. So that's one way they can do it. Then, of course, they got subtle tricks behind there as well. Yeah. Not only that they withhold or distort the facts, that's one thing you can do, which is very powerful. But the other thing is that you can also implant messages on the unconscious without you even knowing it, which they do in advertisements a lot, and they're still doing it. And they've discovered all sorts of things that affect the unconscious when you don't even know it, but it makes you act anyway. So they put messages in there to buy their product, or they put themes in there which are going to attract everybody, and you don't even know they're there, but they're very powerful. In fact, they're more powerful than if they're explicit. If they're explicit, you may be suspicious, but if they're hidden symbols, hidden words. Within a word, there's another word there somewhere that you don't even recognize consciously. But if you analyze it, you probably figure out what the word is. Sex is there somewhere in there, but you don't even see it. But it has a great influence upon your brain. So they developed all these techniques through behavioral science and perception stuff. They've seen how it influences then the advertising media picks it up and uses it against you to do that. And they've got a lot of techniques like that.
Even considering the fact is in Kali Yuga, of course, most people's attention span is weak. Yeah. Their ability to absorb knowledge is weak. And of course, even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati says a picture tells 1,000 words. They can convey these messages like an I see. Yeah. So where do we lie in this? Shouldn't we be trying to get hold of this stuff to actually, not the trick stuff, but the straightforward ability to convey information to people? Also, we should be using this.
You can use the same medium in that way.
Because ultimately people need to know the truth, and then there's less influence by cheaters.
Possible to use it, but then again, the majority is the opposite. They're using their techniques to such a high degree that they attract everybody. So some people say better you don't have a television at all, because it's going to contaminate you in ways you don't know about. It's going to really drag you into and manipulate your mind in certain directions, exploit you, and make you spend your money in certain ways you don't even want to do. Not better not have a television.
There's a lot of people now that until devotees don't have a TV.
They understand that there's some mysterious force there. Maybe it's not so mysterious after all. It's probably implanted there, by purpose.
You see people driving home from work and all they're focusing on is I can't wait to see my soap opera,
Yeah, whatever.
It's like whatever show's on, it's like controls the whole life.
It's another way of diverting everybody's attention, we can say it, for the real problems of life. And they have to work so hard all day, and they're not getting that much money, and the economy's falling apart, and all that. So they just get distracted by different things, different techniques.
The government would love it. It keeps everyone calm, and it keeps people from not asking questions.
Lowers the population. They always quote the famous case in New York when the power went off, and then the next year the population. Because they don't want
no more television.
Their lives, So the sex or the TV.
But we should be careful. We could be killed. There could be people listening. They find out that we're on to them. I'm joking.
The TV is it's very powerful. The government here are trying to stop certain organisations having too many multimedia ownerships. Prevents this, because they know how strong the control.
Because you can brainwash everybody if you own everything.
The reason is selfish, because they know this guy, who if they get this to this guy, he's got control of them as well. It's not that he's just got control. Obviously, got control of whoever's in government, especially in a democracy. So they're trying to stop them getting too much.
Can't have a TV station and a newspaper.
They'll control the government. Of course, usually the opposite. Somebody in the government has got control of that indirectly. That America, that's so. All the major news outlets and all the major television, it ultimately is controlled. It's controlled. And when a news item comes up that's contradictory, it'll come up, but it'll disappear, and it won't be mentioned again, even if it's a real controversial item. It'll just get hidden away, and no one will speak about it again. It won't come up again.
And like techniques to cover it up and make people forget. They totally divert the mind. They don't
actually called baseball.
Is that actually true? Because it seems to me that Americans are often poorly informed on so many issues. They have a very one-eyed view of
definitely, all those things. The news in America is completely different from Europe's news. They have a completely different perception of everything. And that's why Bush can talk about the war on terrorism. Everyone in America accepts it. Because the way they've been exposed to it and the way the slant has got there. Europe, they're all suspicious of the whole thing. They don't really go along with it, because their reporting has been different. They've got different information, different visuals, and different reports on it. It's obviously different. But America's been, especially the television, it's slanted in a certain way. So very great influence. You don't know what's factual anymore in the material world. Okay.